Sir Eric.
Good morning, Ma'am M. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Is my audio loud and clear?
Yes po, malinaw po.
All right. Hello, good morning, Doc Ryan. And of course, good morning to my professor. I'm so happy to see you, Doc Vida. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm so flattered by what you've said, by your words, ma'am. Thank you so much po. And of course, before I start, let me also extend my heartfelt thanks to the PUP Graduate School, to our Dean, Dr. Elmer De Jose, to our program chair for Master's and PhD degree programs, Dr. Priscilla Marzan, to our organizers, to PhD in psychology students, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I hope I'll be able to give justice to this topic. This is quite challenging, but I exhausted all necessary resources that I have for me to be able to somewhat share with you what I know, and probably something that we can also use for our clinical practice, especially for those who are already practicing psychologists, particularly in the field of clinical psychology. Okay, let me now share my screen. Please allow me to share my screen. Thank you. One moment. So before I start, let me have some disclaimers and also reminders to everyone. One moment. Okay, so first of all, let me tell you that I am not a DSM guru, okay? So, and I was not part of the DSM-5 task force, definitely, but I've been handling abnormal psychology, psychopathology, advanced abnormal psychology courses for several years already, and I'm quite very familiar with the DSM-5. And I think it is necessary for everybody to somewhat have a familiarity or awareness about the DSM-5 before we talk about the changes that have been taken place in the DSM-5 TR. So for those who are familiar with the DSM-5, you can easily relate with what I'm saying. But for those who are not familiar with this, it may somewhat it might be somewhat difficult for you to understand what I'm going to say, since a lot of the words or terminologies that I'm going to utter later will be technical jargons related to the DSM-5. So because definitely the reference or the basis of comparison will be the DSM-5, right? Number two, so I may not be able to capture everything. So there are several changes, but not all changes were really significant. All right. So that's why later we're going to talk about, is it also worth buying the DSM-5 TR? I think that's one a major question that you may want to ask later. But then after this topic, after this talk, you will probably decide as to whether or not you're going to buy a copy of the DSM-5 TR. The DSM-5 TR costs around $156. So around 8,000 to 9,000 pesos. Okay, in comparison with the DSM-4 TR, which is I think only $50, right? So, but then again, so there are significant changes, but there are changes that are only pertaining to certain language, no, to certain language use. We're gonna talk about that later. Okay, so and then if you have questions, I would be glad to answer those questions. So, I titled my presentation this way. I hope you guys listen, no, and at the same time, if you again have something to clarify later, just let me know. We'll be having rather an open forum later. And welcome to 359 participants. I was actually it was actually overwhelming when I was looking at the number of shares. It actually reached parang 700 shares. So parang sobrang dami, and I was quite parang medyo kinabahan ako, no? Sabi ko sobrang dami. And then so but then I hope again you'll be able to learn something from me today. So I titled this presentation as Highlights of Changes from the DSM-5 to DSM-5 TR. We'll just take a look at the significant changes, all right, that will really have certain implications in our clinical practice, especially again for those who are clinical psychologists or psychologists who are practicing in the clinical setting. All right. So this is the overview of my presentation. So we're going to go back to the DSM-5. We'll talk about a brief history of it to be able to contextualize this talk. No? So again, for us to be able to understand the new edition, we also have to understand the DSM-5. right? Because the DSM-5 TR is just again by itself a text revision of the DSM-5. And we're gonna talk about also the development of the DSM-5 TR. How did DSM-5 TR come to be? And definitely the emphasis of this presentation would be on the significant changes that appear in the DSM-5 TR. We're gonna talk about each of those, but those that are significant only, right? And then, of course, there are criticisms and controversies. There are current issues related to diagnosis and classification. And we're going to talk about this because definitely it has certain also implications in our practice. Just like what Doc Vida mentioned earlier, that there are several issues, controversies surrounding the development of the DSM-5 and even the DSM-5 TR, and criticisms were actually similar. Criticisms of the DSM-5 were actually similar with that of the controversies and criticisms in DSM-5 TR, right? Okay, so what are my sources? So definitely our primary source is the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM-5 TR. In fact, you can actually download a copy of the changes. It's available in psychiatry.org. So you can see the website or the link. You just have to go to this link and you'll be able to see the changes, all right, that again have been considered. Okay, so it contains a lot of sheets. They included certain sheets of a specific disorder that has certain revision. Like for example, in autism spectrum disorder. So what exactly the revision that has been made, no? So nakalagay yun doon. So you just have to download it and read it. But then again, I think familiarity with the DSM-5 is really necessary for you to be able to see the difference. And I also underwent a training actually for this. I had my online training, sorry. Yeah, so I had an online training with Therapy That Works Institute. The title of the training is DSM-5 TR Diagnosis Made Simple by Dr. Gehert. Okay, so this is the certificate that I received from that institution. Okay, so that actually allowed me to better understand the difference between the DSM-5 and the DSM-5 TR. Okay, so what do I need to know this? So probably this is the reason, or this is the question that we have in mind now, especially again for those who are practicing, for clinical psychologists, for psychiatrists, for counselors, even for social workers and all other mental health professionals. Definitely, number one, it has certain implications on your clinical practice. In view of the fact that there are certain categories that were added, there is a new diagnosis which we're going to talk about later. It is also your ethical obligation to know the accuracy, the proper nomenclature, okay, and the proper way of coming up with certain diagnoses. So as mental health professional, as clinical psychologists, definitely it is something that we have to pay attention to. Okay, so let's start with the brief history of the DSM. So again, I just want to contextualize the discussion. We have to know the DSM-5 first before we proceed to the changes in the DSM-5 TR. All right, so I'd like to start with this, no, the DSM-5 edition, even the DSM-5 TR. So the title abbreviation should be this way. It should be DSM with hyphen, note the hyphen, 5. It should not be a Roman numeral. So this is not DSM with the Roman numeral V, all right? So every time you're going to write, for example, in certain paper or whatever it is that you're going to submit, for example, for conferences and all, and you're going to use the DSM-5 as one of your references, make sure that you don't use this one, the DSM with the Roman numeral V. So this is not proper, okay? And why is that? So this is basically to facilitate digital printing or electronic printing, so that if there are minor revisions, for example, it's going to be DSM 5.1, 5.2, and so on. So that's the reason why it was changed from Roman numeral to a figure of 5. Okay, and then the DSM-5 was actually published in the year 2013. It was I think May 2013 when it was published. So it has to be used starting January of 2014 until now, okay? And the use of the DSM-40R should be only until December 2013. Okay, so that's why if you're still acquainted or um, familiar with the DSM-40R and you're not using the DSM-5, actually you have to use the DSM-5. Okay, and until now, actually, if you're pertaining to certain disorders, because there's only one disorder that has been added in the DSM-5-PR, and that's basically the prolonged grief disorder. And if you're going to look at that, prolonged grief disorder is the DSM-5-PR diagnosis, and the rests are DSM-5 diagnosis. Okay, so that's how we consider the prolonged grief disorder and other disorders that can be found in the DSM-5. The first substantial revision after 20 years, right? David Coffer, Dr. David Coffer and Daryl Ridger were the DSM-5 task force chairs. Okay, and this is a product of several research for over 12 years, no? And it is also has a coordinated effort with that of the WHO, particularly in international classification of diseases. Okay, so what are the steps in formulating the DSM? So of course, the first thing that they have to do is to create the task force, who will be the DSM-5 task force. So who will be the committees, who will be the work groups. So there will be also review committees that are responsible for critiquing and providing necessary comments and reviews with those that have been revised. And of course, we have field trials. And in fact, the APA also provided a website that's psychiatry.org DSM-5 to also communicate the progress of the DSM-5 during the time to the public. So that's how it was developed. All right, so let me just also talk about some of the changes in DSM-5 that did not make, because it has implication also in the DSM-5 TR. So there are changes that were considered but not made. Like for example, number one is the use of biological markers as a diagnostic tool. So this is, I think, the failure of the DSM-5 task force, that is to be able to arrive at certain biomarkers that would allow us to have a more objective and more objective way of diagnosing or coming up with certain diagnoses. Because until now, we rely on the signs and symptoms, we rely on the diagnostic criteria, right? And we also rely on our clinical judgment as our basis of coming up with a diagnosis, which again may not be, completely objective, right? And you know for a fact that if we're talking about certain condition like psychopathology, it has to be, I think, now we have to maintain objectivity, because again, we're going to label people, we're going to diagnose people, right? And diagnosis again requires some objective measures. Rating of disorders or symptoms on a scale. So this is also not completely considered, all right? This is actually considered but not made in the DSM-5. Dimensional approach toward a diagnosis, although the DSM-5-TR is gearing towards that kind of classification approach or system, wherein rather than the categorical approach, we're moving towards dimensional approach in diagnosis. No? So the difference between categorical approach and with that of dimensional approach, in categorical approach, we just state whether the person has a disorder or not. In dimensional approach, it's like a laboratory workup, just like a blood workup, where you will see the levels of cholesterol and so on and so forth, if it is high or low. So parang ganon yung ang ating direction, no, when it comes to psychopathology. So in dimensional approach, we try to look at the symptoms in terms of severity, in terms of its quality. Like for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how anxious are you? That becomes a dimensional approach to diagnosis. So, and I know that we are gearing towards that direction. So there were also disorders proposed in the DSM-5 that were not, again, accommodated. They were rejected. One is the attenuated psychosis syndrome. Although attenuated psychosis syndrome is still part of the DSM-5 TR's conditions for further study. So there's still a lot of studies or research to be conducted to be able to say that this is indeed a separate diagnostic entity. Mixed anxiety depressive disorder was not included internet gaming disorder is actually, part also of conditions for further study, even DSM-5-TR. So in the DSM-5-TR, this is not included as a separate diagnostic category. Okay. And then there were also new disorders added in the DSM-5 from DSM-5, DSM-4-TR rather. So premenstrual dysphoric disorder, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, binge eating disorder. These are considered as new disorders in the DSM-5. Primarily because of the results of certain of research. So, like for example, in disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, children, children during the time when this is not considered as a legitimate diagnosis, were diagnosed with bipolar disorder because of symptoms of irritability and so on, and the tendencies for these children to be medicalized, all right, because of the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So there is a need to address the growing number of children who are, exhibiting symptoms of bipolar disorder. So that's why they came up with the disruptive mood dysregulation disorder category to be able to capture that condition. And binge eating disorder was not considered as a disorder in DSM-4-TR. It's now considered as one. Other disorders that are new in DSM-5, we have mild neurocognitive disorder, somatic symptom disorder, and even hoarding disorder. We're going to talk about some criticisms later. What are the revisions in the DSM-5? Number one is bereavement exclusion. I'll talk about this later. So this is very controversial, all right, in the field of psychopathology. And there are a lot of critics saying that this should not be considered in the first place. There is also a change. For example, in autism spectrum disorder, this was considered before as pervasive developmental disorder. But now, looking at the data and the number of diagnoses, or rather the diagnosis rate, the epidemiology of PDD, one significant reason as to why they have to revise certain diagnosis is when the diagnosis is no longer useful. So the clinical utility of the disorder is not already evident. Like for example, in the case of pervasive developmental disorder, there was high use of the NOS category, all right? NOS category that's not otherwise specified. And this is only given if, for example, the person is exhibiting certain symptoms, but do not fall in any of those categories listed under the diagnostic class. If that is the case, that's the time that we use the NOS category. And surprisingly, there were a lot of cases of PDD NOS during the time, and only few people have been diagnosed with autistic, Asperger's, childhood disintegrative disorder. The reason as to why there is a need to, use the autism spectrum disorder nomenclature. There are also changes in the ADHD, bulimia nervosa in terms of the duration, anorexia nervosa as well. Amenorrhea as part of the diagnostic criteria is not anymore considered. The term mental retardation is not anymore being used nowadays, even in the DSM-5-TR. So we use the term intellectual developmental disorder now. Although in DSM-5, the one that is preferred is intellectual disability. But later, as you will see, what happens to this particular category. Schizophrenia becomes also a spectrum, all right? So the different types of schizophrenia in DSM-4-TR were also removed. Mood disorders, it is now divided into two. We have depressive disorders and also bipolar disorders, but there was a significant change in the DSM-5-TR with regard to mood disorders. If you can recall, in the DSM-5-TR, this again is divided into, rather in DSM-5, mood disorder is not anymore part of any chapter. So what the DSM-5 task force did was to divide or separate depressive disorders with that of bipolar disorders in view of the fact that the treatment may not be similar in depressive and also bipolar disorder. So, but then in DSM-5-TR, you'll see something parang different. No? And there were also certain disorders that were now disorders coming from DSM-4-TR that are now recognized in the DSM-5. Okay, there are also changes in anxiety disorders. There are anxiety disorders in DSM-4-TR which are not anymore considered as anxiety disorders, like trauma and stressor-related disorders, and OCD and related disorders. Okay, so that's just an overview of the DSM-5. I just want you to see how significant changes were from DSM-4-TR to DSM-5. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is the difference between the DSM-5 and also the DSM-5-TR. So how did the DSM-5-TR come to be? So it's, of course, the APA started work on the DSM-5-TR in spring in 2019. So that basically 3 years ago, no, it was composed of the work of over 200 subject matter experts, including many who were involved in the development of the DSM-5. So these subject matter experts were most of the time clinicians, recognized clinicians, and scientific researchers with backgrounds in psychiatry, psychology, social work, pediatrics, neurology, nursing, epidemiology, and even anthropology. So yeah, so we can see how prestigious, so the group of people who participated in the revision. Okay, and then yeah, so this is the task force and the work group members. So majority of the DSM-5 task force definitely is composed of psychiatrists. Second is psychologists. No, so there are also clinical psychologists who participated definitely in the creation of the DSM-5-TR. So same is true in the DSM-5. No, so as you can see here. Okay, so that's how it was actually developed. All right, so now let's talk about the significant changes now. So this is the highlight of this presentation. So it's going to be somewhat detailed. All right. We're going to the specific changes for some of the disorders that, again, considered as significant. Okay, so let's start with so the overview of the major changes. Number one, there is a new diagnosis, and again, there's only one new diagnosis in the DSM-5-TR, and we're pertaining to prolonged grief disorder. I'm going to talk about the diagnostic criteria later, and we'll try to look at the differential diagnosis as well as to how you differentiate, for example, prolonged grief disorder with that of depressive disorder, normal grief, which is very controversial. How do you differentiate it with that of post-traumatic stress disorder, or even to, for example, adjustment disorder? Yeah, we're going to talk about that, right? So, and there is also a new category under the conditions that may be a focus of a clinical attention. This was not part of DSM-5. This was not part of the DSM-5. No, so it was just added in DSM-5-TR. So I'm pertaining to suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury, okay, or NSSI. So these two, though they do not belong in a particular diagnostic class, it actually belongs to other conditions that may be a focus of a clinical attention. Okay, so, and the DSM-5 also provided task force, provided necessary codes for this that possibly legitimates, no, or parang it actually proves the legitimacy of the diagnosis, no. And then we also have the new category, the unspecified mood disorder, which we're going to talk about, and also changes in the language for better clarity. So definitely there are changes in the language to be able to provide some clarification. They actually reworded certain terminologies to be able to somewhat, for example, in gender dysphoria, there are several terminologies that have been revised or reworded to make sure that the words or terminologies that have been used are actually affirming or non-stigmatizing. No, so that's basically the goal of rewording or rephrasing or changes in the language. So that's, I think, the primary that was the primary goal as to why there is a need to change the language. Okay, let's talk about the new diagnosis. So again, there's only one diagnostic category that is added in the DSM-5-TR, and this is considered as the DSM-5-TR new diagnosis. We have prolonged grief disorder. All right, so just a bit of history of prolonged grief disorder. Prior to the DSM-4, or rather prior to the DSM-5, all right, the DSM-4-TR task force did not consider any form of grief as pathological, all right? So in other words, whatever it is that you experience after the death of a loved one, and consider that as a grief reaction, we do not consider that as pathology or pathological. All right, so it's not pathological. But when the DSM-5 task force did the revision, bereavement exclusion was actually removed. In other words, they now included bereavement in the DSM-5 as something pathological, all right, in DSM-5. However, there's no specific diagnostic category that constitutes or that captures the experience of someone with pathological grief, all right? So in other words, if someone, for example, in the DSM-5, right, if grief may be considered as MDD, if symptoms associated with grief resemble an episode of depression and also requires clinical judgment. So in other words, a person who has experienced the loss of a loved one may be diagnosed with major depressive disorder provided that there was a careful evaluation on the part of the clinician, and at the same time, it requires the exercise of clinical judgment. So in other words, someone who has experienced a loss of loved one may be diagnosed with MDD, provided again that it is warranted. Okay? So just like what I said, there's no specific disorder in DSM-5 that captures or that constitutes, all right, the experience of someone who has lost a significant other, right? Or a person may also be considered having adjustment disorder, okay, if the criteria for adjustment disorder is met. Okay? So for example, when someone has experienced a loss of a loved one, definitely it may create certain symptoms, right? And if you look at the adjustment disorder diagnostic criteria, criterion A talks about the development of behavioral and emotional symptoms as a response to any identifiable stressors. So the DSM considers, the DSM-5 considered bereavement or grief as a stressful situation that can actually lead to some emotional or behavioral symptoms, right? But then just because the person has experienced loss of a loved one doesn't automatically follow a diagnosis of adjustment disorder, because criterion B of adjustment disorder is very clear that the symptoms should be significant, meaning it causes significant distress, it causes significant impairment. So the diagnosis of adjustment disorder to those individuals who have experienced the loss of loved one is only warranted, all right, if the symptoms as a reaction to that stressor, all right, cause significant impairment, cause significant distress on the part of the individual. So meaning, if the quality, the intensity, the severity, and duration of the symptoms brought about by the loss of a loved person, all right, is something that exceeds to what is typically expected to one's culture, to what is typically expected to one's age-appropriate norms, will be considered pathological. In fact, the term that is included under the DSM-5 is persistent complex bereavement disorder. This is under the conditions for further study in DSM-5, but in DSM-5 TR, they actually dropped the term. The persistent complex bereavement disorder has been replaced by prolonged grief disorder. Even in adjustment disorder diagnostic criteria or diagnostic features, it's not anymore mentioned. Okay, so the one that is recognized as a nomenclature is not persistent complex bereavement disorder, but rather prolonged grief disorder, to also harmonize it with that of the ICD classification. All right, so that's a bit of history. So before, it was not pathological. No, when the DSM-5 came in, that's the time that it becomes pathological. But in DSM-5, again, there's no specific disorder that constitutes or that that captures the experience of someone with this condition. And here comes the DSM-5 TR, okay, legitimizing the prolonged grief disorder as a separate diagnostic entity. Okay, so let's talk about the essential features of prolonged grief disorder. So what are the essential features? Yeah, number one, it belongs to trauma and stressor related disorder. So if you're going to look at the the DSM-5-TR, this is under the trauma and stress-related disorder diagnostic class together with RAD, reactive attachment disorder, DSED, ASD, acute stress disorder, PTSD muna, then ASD, then adjustment disorder, then after adjustment disorder, here comes the prolonged grief disorder. So the fact that it was under the trauma and stress-related disorder, it actually speaks something about it. It means that people with prolonged grief disorder may be differentiated with that of PTSD, may be differentiated with that of adjustment disorder. So that's why differential diagnosis is really necessary. Okay. So this is also considered as maladaptive grief. Again, we consider grief as a natural reaction to an abnormal situation. So just because the person is grieving doesn't mean that the person is pathological. So there are certain criteria, there are certain characteristics that have to be considered by the clinician for us to say that it is pathological. And at the same time, one thing that we have to look at is the duration of the symptoms. It must be at least 12 months for adults and 6 months for youth or for children and adolescents. Okay. And of course, we have to consider the culture, right? Not expected to one's cultural norms. So in the Philippines, probably we have this what we call babang luksa, diba? Wherein that's part of our cultural norm that may be considered important in coming up with or in the diagnostic process. Okay, clinically significant distress and impairment in normal functioning. I think this basically differentiates pathological and non-pathological condition of grief. Again, normal grief is possible, grief is normal, but it becomes somewhat pathological if the grief reaction interferes the person's ability to function normally. No, it causes significant distress. The person's reaction to it is out of proportion to what is expected to one's personal history as well as to one's culture. And of course, impairment in different areas of functioning such as social, occupational, personal, academic, and all other possible areas. And according to the DSM-5-TR, based on the data that they have gathered, prolonged grief disorder may be more common to people after being exposed to trauma. That's why PTSD may be a comorbidity, right? It's also common to parents due to the death of a child or death of a spouse or partner. Okay, it's also more common to older adults. All right, and of course, unexpected deaths. No, especially if the person is very close or dependent or attached to that person who actually died. Right. So these are some of the features that we can see, no, based on the DSM-5-TR. Okay, let's talk about the diagnostic criteria for prolonged grief disorder. Right? So let's take a look at criterion A. Yeah, of course, there has to be a death of a loved one or significant other, at least 12 months, again, for adults, and then 6 months for children and adolescents. So you have to consider the duration. All right. So the duration has to be in place. This is one significant feature to look at. All right, in differentiating normal and pathological grief. All right, so criterion B, since the death, so these are primary symptoms, I think. Now, these are cardinal symptoms of prolonged grief disorder. Persistent grief response is characterized by both of the following symptoms, which have been present, all right, for most days to a clinically significant degree for at least the last month. Okay. Number one, intense yearning or longing for the deceased person. The word intense here requires clinical judgment. So this is somewhat difficult to measure. How can we say that the yearning or the longing experience of that person for the deceased person is intense? So again, that requires a bit of clinical judgment. Preoccupation with thoughts or memories or deceased. All right, for children and adolescents, maybe focus may be on circumstances rather than thoughts about the person. But then, so two cardinal symptoms are necessary to look at. No, number one is intense longing or yearning for the deceased person, and preoccupation with thoughts and memories. So it's like the person is being preoccupied with the memories of the deceased person. Almost, parang majority of the waking hours is devoted to that. Then that could be qualified as criterion B2. Okay, for criterion C, it's important to look at other symptoms. So there are other symptoms that we have to watch out. And according to the DSM-5 TR, it must be at least 3 of the following. There are 8 additional symptoms on top of the first 2 cardinal symptoms. Number 1 is identity disruption. An example of this is feeling as though part of oneself has died. No, so I think this is this is an example of that. No, so it's like as if you cannot function normally because it's like as if you feel like a part of you is no longer there, right? Ano pa? A marked sense of disbelief about the death, right? That's another one. Avoidance of reminders that the person is dead. You know, avoidance response is also a diagnostic criterion of PTSD. That's I think criterion C of PTSD. So that's why it actually resembles with that of the symptoms of PTSD as well. That's why it's important to look at the difference between PGD and also PTSD. Intense emotional pain, such as feelings of anger, bitterness, and sorrow related to death. All right, difficulty reintegrating into one's relationship. So it's difficult for the person to go back to its normal life or to his or her normal life after the death of a loved one. Like for example, problems engaging with friends once again, pursuing similar interests prior to the death, and of course, planning for the future. Emotional numbness as a result of death. There's an absence or a marked reduction in terms of emotional expression or emotional experience, right? Feeling that life is meaningless as a result of the death, all right? And of course, intense loneliness as a result of the death. So these are additional criteria that have to be looked at, all right, for us to say that someone has prolonged grief disorder. Okay, so yeah, so if you notice again, no, it's actually difficult to also assess the existence of these symptoms. This is also a call to all clinical psychologists to probably come up with diagnostic tools that are properly contextualized. Like in the Philippines, for example, while I also searched literature about prolonged grief disorder, assessment instruments, and even treatment. So there were already identified assessment instruments and treatment for PGD, but I think it has to be contextualized as well, and we have to produce a lot of research on that. And I think that's the importance of paying attention to this diagnosis, because if there is a new diagnosis, if we pathologize certain condition, there's a tendency for us to pay attention to it, to conduct research about it, to know the treatment, to know the interventions necessary to be given, to know the assessment instruments that can be used by the clinicians or diagnostician, right? So again, a prolonged grief disorder as a new diagnosis probably is a call to all of us clinical psychologists to probably conduct more research in the context, in our own context, in the Philippines, for example, to be able to have a better understanding of this condition. Criterion D is about clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, and also all other areas of functioning. This is a generic criterion in almost all diagnostic categories. If you look at the DSM-5, almost all, I'm not saying all because this may not also be applicable to other diagnoses, but in almost all diagnostic categories in the DSM-5, criterion C or criterion D talks about clinical significant distress or impairment. So I think that's one generic criterion or criteria to look at, no, for us to say that someone is probably having a pathological condition. And duration is also important, and severity. Again, this is also one way of differentiating pathological and non-pathological grief. All right, so we look at the duration, how long it has been experienced by the individual, how severe it is in terms of one's expected social, cultural, religious norms, right? So yeah, we have to consider that. And again, it should not be better explained by another mental disorder. So you have to rule out MDD, you have to rule out PTSD, and all other possible diagnoses, right? Because if it is better explained by another mental disorder, then the diagnosis of PGD should not be warranted unless there's a dual diagnosis that it's actually possible for someone to have PGD and at the same time to have, for example, another disorder, provided that again it is warranted. So one of the most common comorbidities of prolonged grief disorder is actually meant major depressive disorder and also PTSD. So if you cannot actually, if it is not better explained by either of these two, then probably that's really PGD. But if in the event that both of these conditions are present, then comorbidity probably is warranted. Okay, you also have to consider, is there a substance that has a direct physiological effect on an individual? No, there are substances that may possibly exacerbate the feelings of longing. All right, there are possible substances that may have the capacity to produce similar symptoms. So you really have to rule that out as well. Or baka naman it is better explained by another medical condition. So again, it has not to be, these are, we call it in DSM-5, they call it exclusionary diagnosis. Okay, when you say exclusionary diagnosis, what are those conditions that have to be excluded, that have to be ruled out for us to say that the diagnosis is really warranted? Okay. All right, so those are the diagnostic criteria for prolonged grief disorder. Definitely, just like what I said earlier, it has certain implications in your professional practice, especially nowadays, especially after we are hopefully in the post-pandemic era, right? And you know for a fact that it created a toll to one's mental health because of the death of loved ones. And you know, in other countries, there was a significant increase in the number of people who are experiencing unusual grief because of the pandemic. All right, so let's talk about the functional consequences. Now, after someone is diagnosed with prolonged grief disorder, these are possible consequences that may occur. Number one, impairment in functioning, definitely, right? So because this is part of the criteria, and most of the time, impairment is associated with harmful health behaviors, like being unable to take care of oneself, being unable to eat properly, right? You know, lifestyle is changed and so on. These are examples of harmful health behaviors that are associated with the experience of grief. All right, higher risk of long-term developmental consequences. Definitely after, for example, especially among children or adolescents who have experienced or have been diagnosed with this, may actually develop some negative consequences in the future that may have possibly an impact in terms of their coping strategies or mechanisms and all. Right? What else? Heightened risk for suicidal ideation. It's also common for people with prolonged grief disorder to have suicidal ideations or suicidality. So the reason also why, again, it has implication to our practice, the severity of the symptoms experienced by the person with PGD should be considered, especially if there is a presence of suicidality or suicidal ideations, suicidal attempts or plans, right? The more that we have to, you know, pay attention to it. And there is higher risk of substance use. This is also one possible comorbidity. There's also higher risk of medical health conditions, primarily because of harmful health behaviors, right? So when the person is experiencing this this category or disorder, that definitely will create a toll to one's physical health as well, leading to possible medical conditions. Higher risk of impaired cognitive functioning based on the data that they've gathered in middle age and also in older adults. So even cognitive functioning may possibly be influenced or affected by this condition, right? So these are the functional consequences. So let's talk about the differential diagnosis. So it's important to look at the difference between you know, these disorders with that of prolonged grief disorder, so that we know how to somewhat draw the line between two disorders that may have symptomatic overlap, right? Let's talk about normal grief. Just like what I said, the loss of loved one doesn't automatically follow a diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder, right? So there is such thing as normal grief, and it's a normative reaction to stressful situation. Okay, and it has to be distinguished based on number one, duration of the symptoms. Again, if it is lasted for 12 months already, then you know, if the experience of the symptoms is at least 12 months, then we may consider that as a prolonged grief disorder. We may also consider severity, how severe the symptoms are, right? In comparison with that of someone who is experiencing normal grief. Again, in terms of severity, severe assessment of severity, we have to look at the personal history. We have to look at that. No, we also have to look at the culture. We have to look at something that is expected on one's age. So there is such thing as age-appropriate norms. The one significant aspect to look at for us to say if it is severe or not. And this may have also, people with prolonged grief disorder may also have severe grief around days that are reminders. Like for example, rather people who experience normal grief, rather, no? You have severe grief, okay, around days that are reminders. Like for example, kapag birthday nung tao na namatay o kaya anniversary. So definitely, grief may be severe, no? Grief reaction may be severe. Pero during that day, during those days lang. Okay? So normal 'yon. Okay? So pero if it is more persistent, okay, across a year for example, then that could be considered as pathological. And again, adjustment disorder may be considered for more typical grief response. I think I've mentioned this already. In the event that, for example, the person has experienced the loss of a loved one and the person did not meet the full criteria for prolonged grief disorder, but definitely there are emotional and behavioral symptoms brought about by this experience, adjustment disorder should be the right diagnosis. Okay? So again, just like what I said earlier, the death of a loved one, if it is pathological, you can consider this as adjustment disorder if the person did not meet the full criteria for prolonged grief disorder. Okay? So, and I think this is more common. No? Adjustment disorder may be more common diagnosis compared to prolonged grief disorder and so on. Okay, so we also have to differentiate PTSD because just like what you noticed earlier, there was a similarity between PTSD symptoms and also PGD. It is distinguished based in the nature and type of symptoms being experienced. Like for example, there are also intrusion symptoms in PGD. Intrusion symptom is part of diagnostic criteria of PTSD. Intrusion symptom, that's criterion, I think criterion B. Criterion B of PTSD, no? And then yung intrusion symptom doon is more of re-experiencing of the event. Okay? It's more of flashback, more of dissociative reactions to it. So yun yung intrusion symptom kay PTSD. Pero kay PGD, intrusion symptom, the focus is on thoughts about many aspects of the relationship with the person. Kumbaga parang maiisip mo na lang yung mga masasayang nakaraan nyo, yung mga pagsasama nyo, parang ganon. Dito kay PTSD kasi yung intrusion, re-experiencing, it's like as if the traumatic event is recurring. Yun yung pagkakaiba nila. So there are similarities in terms of the symptoms, but the type of symptoms being experienced and also the nature of the symptom may not be the same. Another example is in terms of avoidance. If you go back to the diagnostic criteria of prolonged grief disorder, di ba meron dong avoidance. Pero ang avoidance kay PTSD is more of avoidance of the reminders of the traumatic event. So it's the traumatic event, not necessarily the person, no? Or the person who has died. So that's basically something that we have to look at to differentiate PTSD and prolonged grief disorder. For separation anxiety disorder, anxiety is focused on the current attachment figure and not on separation from a deceased person. So the diagnosis of separation anxiety disorder requires that the anxiety is based on the current attachment figure of the child or of the individual, right? Although, separation anxiety disorder is more common among children, this can also be diagnosed in adults provided that the symptoms have lasted for 4 weeks already. Okay, for depressive disorders, again, this is the major comorbidity, right? The most common comorbidity is a depressive disorder. And to differentiate it is that in major depressive disorder, distress is not focused on the feelings of loss, all right, and separation from a loved one, but reflecting generalized low mood. So you have to consider that. No? So what is also the focus of the symptoms, the feelings of loss and separation? If it is focused on feelings of loss and separation, then that could be better explained by PGD rather than by major depressive disorder. So it should be PGD. That is the right diagnosis. No? So you have, again, going back to the last criterion F of PGD, if it is better explained by the symptom of another mental disorder such as MBD, then the one that better explains it should be the diagnosis. For psychotic disorder, this is also part of the differential diagnosis because a person who experienced a loss of loved one may also have experience of hallucinations, for example, But hallucinations about disease are common cross-culturally, right? So parang common itong nangyayari na parang naririnig mo yung boses ng taong namatay, ganyan, or kaya nakikita mo siya bigla, gano'n, di ba? Sometimes, ano siya no? Minsan you also have to consider baka ito ay acute, rather, ano, no? Yung tinatawag natin na brief psychotic disorder. Kasi it's common for brief psychotic disorder not to experience hallucinations and delusions after a stressful life event. But it only lasts for 1 month, di ba? And then it should last for 1 month. There should be an evidence that the symptoms remit after the 1 month period for us to say that it is brief psychotic disorder. But if hallucinations are not related to disease, no, not related to the death of a person or to the loss of the loved one, then that could be better explained by any psychotic disorder such as schizophrenia. And you also have to look at the primary symptoms of schizophrenia, definitely. No? So it's not about hallucination only. Remember that there are 3 criteria that are considered as primary. One is delusion, hallucination, and disorganized speech. Right? So these primary symptoms should also be present for us to say that that is more of a psychotic disorder rather than a prolonged grief disorder. Okay? All right, there you go. So that's basically it. Now that's what a prolonged grief disorder is all about. I hope you had a better understanding of prolonged grief disorder now. Okay, so let's now talk about some other changes. Like for example, there is a new category. We call it the suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury. So this is added under the other conditions that may be a focus of clinical attention. So this is not included in any major diagnostic class or chapter in DSM-5 TR. All right. So, but this is something new. You cannot find this in DSM-5, and I think this is also helpful for clinicians, especially if you're dealing with patients or exhibiting suicidal behavior, and also non-suicidal behavior. Okay. So for suicidal behavior, it means that there is potentially self-injurious behavior with at least some intent to die as a result of the act, right? So we consider that as suicidal behavior, provided that on the part of the clinician, you were able to assess and you were able to really see and detect that there is some intent on the part of the person to die as a result of the act that is exhibited. Okay? So you have to consider that because that differentiates suicidal behavior with that of non-suicidal behavior. In non-suicidal behavior, there is self-inflicted damage such as in a form of cutting, bruising, or pain. All right? But then there must have an absence of suicidal intent. So I think what is challenging is to be able to look at whether or not the person has an intent to commit suicide. Because if there is an intent to die, there is an intention on the part of the behavior, the right diagnosis is suicidal behavior. Okay, and non-suicidal behavior for those who have been exhibiting self-inflicted behaviors leading to some physical damages, no, like in a form of cutting, bruising, pain, ganon, and all, then that could be considered as a non-suicidal behavior. So there are 2 specifiers also. Current suicidal behavior during the time of assessment, is this something present? History, was there a history of suicidal behavior, for example, prior to it? And same is true with non-suicidal behavior. So let's talk about another category. So this is the one that I mentioned earlier. So this was part of DSM-4 before, but was removed in DSM-5, but decided to include it once again in DSM-5 TR. No? So what is this? No, unspecified mood disorder is, so this is basically diagnosed when the symptomatic presentations are similar. Take note, to a mood disorder. When we say mood disorder, we're talking about either depressive disorders or bipolar disorders, right? So there are similar presentations of the symptoms, okay, or there is similar presentations of symptoms to a mood disorder. Pwedeng bipolar, pwedeng depressive. And remember that it should cause clinically significant distress or impairment in function. Okay? But this is the difference between mood disorders such as depressive and bipolar with that of unspecified mood. Unspecified mood disorder can be found under the depressive disorders diagnostic class and bipolar disorders diagnostic class. Yan yung pinakahuling diagnostic category doon na makikita nyo. Okay? And you have to make sure that the symptoms do not meet the full criteria for any of the disorders in either bipolar or depressive disorder. So dapat hindi siya magfo-fall in any of the bipolar disorder diagnostic classes. Remember, in bipolar disorder, we have bipolar 1, we have bipolar 2, and we have cyclothymic disorder, right? For depressive disorders, we have major depressive disorder, we have persistent depressive disorder or dysthymia, diba? We have premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and also disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So make sure that the symptoms do not fall in any of those categories under the diagnostic classes, all right, that we have mentioned. All right, so dapat hindi siya magpo-fall in any of those. And at the same time, it is difficult to choose between unspecified bipolar and related disorder and unspecified depressive disorder. Kumbaga, parang it's difficult for you as a clinician to say, ito ba yan specified? Kasi sa DSM-5, meron tayong tinatawag na other specified diagnosis. There's also unspecified diagnosis. So other specified diagnosis is given in the event that the person has been exhibiting symptoms of a particular disorder but do not fall in any of those categories listed under that diagnostic class. All right? And the clinician chooses to explain as to why the person did not meet the full criteria. An example of that is other specified, for example, schizophrenia spectrum disorder, persistent auditory hallucination, wherein the clinician chooses to explain the reason as to why the person did not meet the full criteria. That's under other specified diagnosis. For unspecified diagnosis, all right, same, the person did not meet the full criteria. However, okay, did not meet the full criteria and do not fall in any of those categories, but it causes significant changes in functioning or impairment in functioning and so on. All right, and the clinician chooses not to explain the reason as to why the person did not meet the full criteria or did not fall in any of those categories, right? So that's the time that we use unspecified. Now, upon careful evaluation, the person did not meet the full criteria for bipolar disorder, any of the bipolar disorder diagnostic class, and did not meet also the did not meet any diagnostic category under the depressive disorder diagnostic class. Okay, then that's the time that you consider that as other specified or unspecified. And yet, hindi pa rin siya unspecified, hindi pa rin siya unspecified bipolar, hindi pa rin unspecified depressive. So ngayon, ano nang diagnosis mo? Gawin mong unspecified mood disorder. Actually, this is verbatim. No? Kinuha ko to sa DSM-5. Ang sabi talaga, TR, sabi talaga doon, it is difficult to choose between unspecified bipolar and related disorder and unspecified depressive disorder. So hindi siya unspecified bipolar, hindi siya unspecified depressive, but it is, a mood disorder. So might as well use the term unspecified mood disorder. Okay, so it was again restored from the DSM-40R framework. Okay, all right, there you go. So let's talk about some revisions to specific criteria language. So yung iba, just like what I said, there were changes or revisions. Not in terms of the criteria itself, but on the language or terminologies that they have chosen to use, all right, instead of those that have been included in the DSM-5. All right, let's talk about in autism spectrum disorder, for example, it has several criteria, and one specific criterion that has been changed is basically criterion A. If you're going to look at criterion A, ang nakalagay doon is as manifested by the following symptoms. In the DSM-5 TR, it has to be like this. It is now clarified as manifested. Take note, ang nilagay lang by all of the following. So ibig sabihin, kasi pag tiningnan niyo yung criterion A ni autism spectrum disorder, ito yung makikita natin. Deficits in social emotional reciprocity, deficits in nonverbal communication, deficits in developing and maintaining relationship. So sabi lang ng DSM-5 as manifested by the following, pero hindi nila in-include yung all. So parang medyo ambivalent or vague yung as manifested by the following, or parang hindi siya clear, di ba? So kaya ang ginawa ng DSM, all, dapat daw lahat ng criteria, lahat ng simptomas na nasa criterion A is being exhibited by the person or by the child who is suspected to have autism spectrum disorder. Okay? So yan lang yung pagbabago kay autism. Okay, criterion B remains the same. So dapat may restricted or repetitive patterns of behavior. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-diagnose ng autism spectrum disorder ng walang criterion B. If it is only criterion A that is present, then probably that is better explained by social communication disorder. No? So that's why criterion B has to be included as well, has to be exhibited as well by the child or by the individual. And criterion B without criterion A does not also constitute autism spectrum disorder. This is probably stereotypic movement disorder. So that's why that's differential diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So andyan pa rin yung the development of the symptoms should be during developmental period. So dapat early childhood or early development. So syempre dapat may impairment in functioning, especially in academic, and should not be better explained by another mental disorder or by any other medical condition. Okay, so for bipolar 1 and 2 disorders naman, okay, criterion B in bipolar 1 and criterion C in bipolar 2 have been changed to allow for the possibility that the diagnosis of bipolar can coexist with another or with other psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, schizophreniform, delusional disorder, or others. This both and superimposed language replaces either or language. So parang it's like this, no? One differential diagnosis of bipolar disorder is schizophrenia or schizophrenia spectrum disorder, right? So you have to consider yung difference nila, no? So ito ba talaga ay bipolar disorder or ito talaga ay schizophrenia? So you have to rule that out, okay? So now, if it is both conditions, so pwedeng may bipolar disorder and at the same time meron din siyang schizophrenia, 'di ba? So pwede mo na siyang i-diagnose ngayon. Ang tawag doon ay superimpose. This terminology was present in DSM-4TR. Okay, so superimposed meaning it is possible for bipolar disorder to coexist with psychotic disorder, provided again that the criteria are met, no, for that condition. So that's again another change, significant change in the DSM-5-TR. So for major depressive disorder, right, change criterion D, which made an either or, actually almost similar with a bipolar disorder. So it allows also superimposed reality where some episodes may involve other disorders, but the basic components of MDD are still accounted for. So remember, it is still MDD, but it's possible for MDD to be superimposed with that of other symptoms of different psychological disorder. That again allows the possibility of coexistence, no, of these conditions. Okay, for intellectual developmental disorder, it is used to clarify the disorder's relationship with the ICD-11's disorders of intellectual development. So what we're using now as a terminology, the one that is preferred, all right, is intellectual developmental disorder, or intellectual development disorder. Although intellectual disability is still part of the diagnostic criteria, all right, it's placed in parentheses for continued use, but then the preferred term is intellectual development disorder because this is more harmonized with that of ICD-11's disorders of intellectual development. Okay, so IDD has been considered, or it was considered in the past as mental retardation. This is again has been removed in DSM-5 because this is more stigmatizing, right? And that definitely that has an effect on someone's experience. So kaya we don't use any more mental retardation. If we are pertaining to mental retardation, the preferred term is intellectual development disorder or intellectual disability. But again, the more preferred term now is intellectual development disorder. Same is true with functional neurological symptom disorder. All right, so this is also known as or formerly considered as conversion disorder. And conversion disorder is, I think, one of the parang yan yung mas sikat na term, di ba? But the term has fallen out of use. Okay, this is now considered as functional neurological symptom disorder. Nilagyan lang nila ng parenthesis si conversion disorder para kahit papaano, may for better recall, 'di ba? Sa ano nga ba tong functional neurological symptom disorder? Okay, FNSD, from the word neurological, it affects motor and sensory related functions, right? That is not correlated with that is not correlated with recognized neurological or medical conditions. So the diagnosis of functional neurological symptom disorder requires that the symptoms affecting motor or sensory functions, all right, are incompatible with any recognized neurological or medical condition. That's a time that we can diagnose functional neurological symptom disorder. So let's use the term FNSD instead of conversion disorder, because conversion disorder is also has stigma in it, no? So parang mas stigmatizing yung word the conversion disorder. And I think functional neurological symptom disorder is the more appropriate nomenclature based on international standards. Okay, so that's FNSD. All right, so let's talk about gender dysphoria. In this category, there are several changes in terms of the terminologies or language. All right, but then the criteria were not changed. All right, the main assumption or the condition is not changed. Okay, it remains the same. It's just that they changed the language into more affirming. Parang it has more affirming impact, no, on the part of the person. Like for example, rather than using the word desired gender, we're using now experienced gender. Okay? Ano pa? Rather than saying across sex medical procedure or gender reassignment treatments, ang ginagamit nating term na ay gender affirming medical procedure or treatments. Okay? Pwedeng gender affirming medical treatments or gender affirming treatments, no? So parang ganun. Ano pa? Rather than saying cross-sex hormone treatment, we call it gender affirming hormone treatment. Okay? And then we also use natal male instead of individual assigned male at birth. Medyo mahaba yun, no? Pero ngayon, mas maikli na siya. Natal female replaces individual assigned female at birth. Diba? Ano pa? Differences in sex development was noted as an alternative term to pertaining to disorders of sex development. So rather than saying disorders of sex development, we say differences in sex development. So that is more affirming, di ba? Compared to the previous terminologies, right? But again, in terms of the diagnostic criteria, it remains the same. Again, just a bit of history, gender dysphoria was considered as gender identity disorder in the past, okay? In DSM-4TR, but in the DSM-5, it was significantly revised in view of the fact that in gender identity disorder, there is this tendency to pay attention to the identity as the source of pathology. But remember, in gender dysphoria, the focus of clinical attention is not on the identity, but rather on the distress or dysphoria that is associated with the incongruence between the experienced gender and then the assigned gender. Okay, so again, we use gender dysphoria, no? So to be able to pay attention to the dysphoria component of the disorder. It's not the identity that is the focus of the treatment, all right? The focus of the treatment is on the dysphoria that is associated with the experience of incongruence, okay? So that's what we mean by gender dysphoria. All right, so another one is persistent depressive disorder. Everyone is familiar with dysthymia, right? So we're not anymore using that term, okay? So we don't use dysthymia anymore. Ang gagamitin na natin ay persistent depressive disorder. Even in DSM-5, naka-parenthesis pa siya no? Pero ngayon wala na siya talaga doon. Okay, it also removed extraneous specifiers that really only apply to MDD kasi may mga specifiers kasi si MDD, no? Andyan yung with melancholic features, andyan yung mood congruent and mood incongruent psychotic features, seasonal affective, mga ganon, di ba? Or seasonal pattern specifier. So ito yung mga specifiers na MDD na hindi naman actually applicable kay PDD. Kasi remember, PDD is a milder form of depression but more chronic. So when it comes to the severity of the symptoms, it is not as severe as MDD. So therefore, those specifiers may not be applicable, like melancholia. Melancholia is very, melancholic features as specifier is very severe. So how can you actually specify someone with melancholic features if it is just a milder form of depression? So parang, it's not logical. So kaya tinanggal nila. So ang nandiyan na lang si anxious distress specifier tsaka si atypical features. Okay? Right. So ito pa, social phobia. Social phobia has been, I think this is one popular terminology as well, no? In psychopathology. So this is not anymore being used. Hindi na natin siya gagamitin, okay? Ang ginagamit natin na the one that is accepted is social anxiety disorder. Okay? Anyway, this has been used by a lot of clinicians already, no? So parang very very few clinicians na lang ang gumagamit ng social phobia as a nomenclature. Okay? All right. So, and then in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder, actually this is a minor revision, but I just want you to see that the DSM-5 is not perfect. All right. So there are also flaws, and it's okay. All right. It's okay to have some imperfections, especially if these are just minor details. Like if you're going to look at the criterion A2 of post-traumatic stress disorder, meron nakalagay doon na note, no? Tapos colon, nakalagay, witnessing does not include events that are witnessed only in electronic media, television, movies, or pictures. So it only means na hindi ka pwedeng makaranas ng trauma kung napanood mo lang sa TV, yung traumatic event, di ba? Electronic media. So in other words, it disqualifies media account. No? So hindi pwedeng sabihin na na-trauma ka just because nanood ka ng movie. Okay? Pero kung titingnan nyo doon sa criterion A2 din, no, ang nakalagay doon, it already indicates that the event must be witnessed in person. So parang, di ba, pang redundant na to. So parang, oo nga dapat nga witness in person. So ibig sabihin, hindi siya dapat witness in electronic media, di ba, television, movie. So parang, inulit lang, di ba? Inulit lang yung sinabi ni criterion A2. Diba? So it's kind of redundant. So that's why tinanggal lang yung note. So pag tiningnan niyo yung post-traumatic stress disorder diagnostic criteria for children or younger than 6 years old, wala na yung criterion, note under criterion A2. So simpleng ganun lang, no? Tinanggal nila. Okay, tapos ano pa? Other specified OC and related disorder chapter includes the word Jikoshu Kayofu. Okay? This is actually originated from Japan as a culture-bound syndrome, but then to prevent cultural specificity because it is somewhat evident not only in certain culture, right? Not it was perceived to be as culture-bound syndrome in Japan, but then nakita nila that this is not exclusive to Japan, so that's why they have to remove the term Jikoshu Kayofu. Ang tawag na natin dito ay olfactory reference disorder. No, so parang you feel like yung parang you remit foul odor, and ang tendency is nakaka-offend ka ng ibang tao, parang gano'n, no? So tinanggal na yan as a culture, rather as the terminology. Ang ginagamit nating term ay olfactory reference disorder. For avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, they actually remove criterion of failure to meet nutritional energy needs because it's kind of redundant also with interference with psychosocial functioning. So to give emphasis on the interference with psychosocial functioning, so they actually remove that. So mas mahalaga kasi yung interference with psychosocial functioning. Okay? Okay, in terms of other specified feeding and eating disorder, particularly kay atypical anorexia nervosa, this is other specified feeding and eating disorder example number 1. Okay, makikita nyo doon, atypical anorexia. And what is atypical anorexia? This is diagnosed when someone, for example, is exhibiting symptoms related to anorexia nervosa or similar to anorexia nervosa, but the person did not meet the full criteria, particularly yung significant weight loss. There is significant weight loss, di ba? Kay anorexia, criterion A in anorexia nervosa says that dapat there is restriction of food intake leading to weight loss, and weight loss, the body weight should be significantly below normal. That's criterion A. Paano kapag yung tao na-meet yung criterion B, which is about fear of weight gain or engaging in activities that will interfere weight gain, and criterion C is body image disturbance. Meron siya nun, pero meron ding restriction of food intake. Yun nga lang, walang significant weight loss. Okay? So hindi siya nakakwalify sa criterion A. So ang diagnosis siya becomes other specified feeding or eating disorder. Most specifically, atypical anorexia nervosa. Ngayon, yun lang dati. Naglagay sila ng additional, parang to qualify if it is atypical anorexia or not. New language states that individuals with atypical anorexia nervosa may experience many of the physiological complications associated with anorexia nervosa. So dapat daw, para masabi natin na atypical anorexia nervosa ito, yung nakakaranas nito ay dapat ding makaranas ng physiological complications. We're not praying for it, but there has to be, physiological complications associated with anorexia nervosa, right? To say that it is atypical. So ibig sabihin, yung absence of significant weight loss as a differentiating feature between anorexia nervosa and atypical anorexia nervosa is just one feature. Another feature is dapat may physiological complications associated with anorexia nervosa. Not to say that it is atypical, right? Because it's not typical for anorexia nervosa, okay? All right, so for other specified schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorder in DSM-5, example number 4 under other specified schizophrenia, no? So merong 4 yon. Number 1 is persistent auditory hallucination. I can't remember 2 and 3, but number 4 is delusional symptoms in partner of individual with delusional disorder. If you look at the term partner, parang there is this this could be mistaken as a romantic partner, a requirement of romantic partner or intimate relationship kasi yung term na partner, di ba? So ang ginawa lang nila, binago lang nila yung term na partner. So to also say that this is not exclusive to romantic partner. So ang ano na yung term, ang gamit na natin ay an individual with prominent delusion. It becomes now delusional symptoms in an individual with prominent delusions. Parang ganon. No? So rather than partner. So yun lang yung nagbago dyan kay other specified. Okay, so there are also minor text revisions in attenuated psychosis syndrome, although this is again conditions for further study. Meron din kay delirium, parang it has changed into subsyndromal, so it's more of below the syndrome. Narcolepsy, meron ding pagbabago, tsaka dito kay other specified substance medication. But then I did not include this na because these are just minor text revisions. Dun sa iba yung parang major revisions talaga that I have mentioned. All right, so actually that's it. Yun yung mga changes in DSM-5-TR that I find significant. Again, that has possible implications in the diagnosis or in our clinical practice. So what are practical implications now after knowing the changes? Actually, if you're going to look at that, most significant changes really to our practice as clinical psychologists or clinicians will be the introduction of prolonged grief disorder, right? And also the suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury. And the rest is just, again, rewarding, di ba? Just have to use the proper terminology, just have to use the proper nomenclature, di ba, pertaining to these disorders. Pero if you're going to look at, the practical side of it, it's only prolonged grief disorder that has been added, and also suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury. Actually, suicidal behavior and NSSI pa nga is under the conditions that may be a focus of a clinical attention. Diba? Right. So we'll now go to the last. We'll now go to the last part of my presentation, and it's about controversies and criticism. So definitely there are a lot of criticisms concerning not only the DSM-5-TR but even the DSM-5, especially in view of the fact that grief is now again in the process of pathologizing, right? So let me just share with you this tweet I got from Dr. Alan Francis. Alan Francis was the chair of DSM-4-TR for task force, okay? So ito yung prior to DSM-5. I actually followed him on Twitter, and then naaliw ako sa mga tweet niya. So ito yung sabi niya, there's no reason for social workers or anyone else to buy DSM-5-TR. Right. 1, same codes as DSM-5. Number 2, it's only new diagnosis, prolonged grief, sabi pa niya, is a disaster. Okay. Number 3, the sole purpose of prevention is to sell books and make money to balance APA batch. So may mga ganun, di ba? And protect your friends from, and so on. So parang $156 rip-off. So kasi ganyan siya, medyo mahal siya, $156 nga. So kumpara dun sa DSM-4-TR. And Alan Francis has been a vocal critic of the DSM-5 since it was released, right? So when the DSM-5 was about to release, Alan Francis, again, as the chair of the DSM-4 task force, decided not to join or involve himself in the newer edition of the DSM prior to DSM-5, no? So kumbaga okay na, graduate na ako diyan, nakagawa na kami ng DSM-4 at DSM-4TR. So hindi na ako sasali diyan. Pero yun nga, ang daming changes sa DSM-5, lalo na yung again, no, yung bereavement exclusion was removed, doon talaga siya parang medyo na-disappoint. Tapos yung somatic symptom disorder, no? So kasi sabi niya, yung somatoform disorder daw should not be diagnosed if it is medically explained. But in DSM-5, regardless if it is medically explained, no, whether it is medically explained or not, provided that the person has met the criteria for that disorder, then pwedeng i-diagnose ng somatic symptom disorder. And according to Dr. Alan Francis, changes are unsafe and unscientifically unsound. The medical illness diagnosed, again, as somatic symptom disorder. Kasi nga, yung medical illness, basta may symptoms ka ng somatic symptom disorder, pwede kang i-diagnose. In DSM-4TR, hindi ka pwedeng i-diagnose kung may medical condition ka, kahit may symptoms ka pa ng anxiety and so on. Okay, ano pa? Sabi din niya, no, DSM-5 will mislabel normal people, promote diagnostic inflation, encourage inappropriate medical use. So of course, we just have to show the criticism, just for us also to think critically about these things. Okay, so parang yeah, there's this tendency of diagnostic inflation. No? So kasi nga sobrang daming diagnosis. So yung mga dating hindi naman legitimate form of diagnosis becomes a diagnosis, katulad nga ng grief. Kasi nga before in DSM-4TR, it's not, di ba? So those who are not supposed to be diagnosed will be diagnosed now because it was already added. Ito yung sabi niya, no? This is the saddest moment in my 45-year career of studying, practicing, and teaching psychiatry. The Board of Trustees of APA has given its final approval to a deeply flawed DSM-5 containing many changes that seem clearly unsafe and scientifically unsound. Our patients deserve better. Society deserves better, and mental health professions deserve better. So yan yung sabi niya. Okay? So anong sabi ni Dr. Francis prolonged grief disorder? So let's talk about that. No? Why is this so destructive according to him? So para ng balance, no, makita natin yung pros and cons din, no, ng pagdagdag nitong prolonged grief disorder. Sabi niya, there can never be a uniform expiration date on normal grief. Kasi nga, di ba, there is a duration of 12 months. And the DSM-5TR should not feel empowered to impose one. People grieve in their own ways for periods of time that vary widely depending on the person. The nature of the laws and the relevant cultural practices mislabeling grief as mental disorder stigmatizes the grievers, exposes them to unneeded psychiatric medication, and insults the dignity of their lives. But this is according to him, as a vocal critic of the DSM-5. All right, so let's talk about the strengths. No? So ano naman yung strengths ng DSM-5? So definitely, number one, I think what seem to be the major strength, not only of DSM-5, but even DSM-4TR. Kasi if you're going to, if you try to look at the evolution of DSM, yung DSM-1, no, sobrang laki ng difference at DSM-2, sobrang laking difference. Una pa lang pagdating sa structure ng libro, sobrang kapal ng DSM-4, DSM-5, di ba? Significantly thicker than the DSM-2. And in terms of the diagnostic criteria in DSM-4, even in DSM-3 are more explicit, are more specific compared in DSM-2. Okay? And again, there is an emphasis on empirical research before the decision as to whether or not certain category will be included as a legitimate form of diagnosis is based on the consensus among seniors in the organization. So parang ganun. No? So pero ngayon, based on empirical research na siya. No? So there are field trials, there are scientific investigations that would allow us to say whether or not the symptoms or the diagnostic criteria are structurally valid and so on. Again, I just like what I said, the use of explicit diagnostic criteria. The DSM-5 is very very specific, very concrete. Although we cannot get away with definitely with the importance of clinical judgment, but if you are reading the DSM-5, makikita nyo sa diagnostic features, they provide a lot of examples. They provide a discussion for each of the criterion. No, so hindi lang sa criteria na at least ganito over a period of blah blah blah. Pag tiningnan nyo sa diagnostic feature, merong discussion as to what they mean by criterion A. And I think that's for me, no, as a clinician, that's a significant parang aspect of the DSM. And again, they even included associated features. They also included past functional consequences. At I think major parang major section that really helps clinician to somewhat become more confident pagdating sa kanilang diagnosis is yung differential diagnosis. No? So I think yun yung isa sa pinakamahalagang component of it. And then there is interclinician reliability. No? So mas mataas ang reliability, inter-rater reliability. Though it's not perfect, it's difficult to have a perfect inter-rater reliability on certain conditions that do not have objective measures. This is more of a theoretical in terms of language because the older edition of the DSM is the language that has been used, no, or the language was pertaining to psychoanalytical or very psychoanalytical terms. Parang mas may touch ni Freud yung kanilang terms dati. So ngayon, at theoretical na, no? You don't see any flavors of behaviorism or cognitive whatever, no. And of course, I think one major strength of diagnosis for me, no, as a clinician is, it facilitates communication among researchers and also clinician. Diba, just like what I said, we pay attention to it. When there is a new diagnosis, it actually allows us to know more about it in terms of treatment, in terms of assessment, in terms of risk factors, protective factors, prognostic factors that would help our clients, our patients, right? To have better recovery, to have better experience of treatment, for example. So I think that's one major strength. No, I think one significant factor that we have to probably pay attention to is not really the legitimizing certain conditions. This is my take. No, this is my take on this. You may want to disagree with me, but then for me, if you're going to legitimize this as a form of psychological disorder, prolonged grief disorder, as long as it provides treatment to people, as long as we help them to become better, 'di ba? So para kasing kapag hindi siya ginawang disorder, there's a tendency for them not to know exactly what they feel. 'Di ba? It allows us to be able to know exactly what they feel and be able to know the proper treatment. Right? Because if we do not know exactly what the problem is, the treatment may not also be implemented properly. Because the treatment for depression may not be exactly similar when it comes to its efficacious and effectiveness to people with prolonged grief disorder. So I think for me, there is a need, no? There is a need to legitimize this and again, consider this as a separate diagnostic entity, so that it will allow us also clinicians to provide necessary assessment tools or treatments and also develop assessment tools. 'Di ba? So kasi parang ang major problema talaga natin is yung stigma, 'di ba? So I think that's something that we have to, pay attention to. 'Di ba? Na parang anong gagawin natin para kahit papaano ma-reduce yung stigma that is associated with mental disorders. Kasi parang halimbawa, I'm not comparing exactly these two, no? So pero parang in medical condition, if you're going to look at that, though this is not exactly at all a medical condition, pero 'di ba kapag yung isang tao merong medical condition, walang ganung stigma, no? Pag inuubo ka, may sipon ka. Pero ngayon parang meron na because of COVID-19, 'di ba? Pag umuubo parang nilalayuan, ganyan and all. Pero 'di ba, dati naman parang it's a natural phenomenon, parang ganun. That may require treatment so that we can help people. So for me, if this is a way for us to better help individuals to cope, to better help individuals to thrive and improve the quality of life, yeah, for me, it's okay. Diba? So, but again, that's me. That's my take on that. All right. So, what are the parang the downside naman? No? So, breadth of coverage. So, sobrang dami nga. Parang there is this diagnostic overexpansion. So, sobrang lahat na lang ata disorder. Parang ganun yung sinasabi ng mga critics. Ano pa? Controversial cut-offs. So, sabi ni DSM-5, sa depression daw, out of 9, dapat may 5. So, paano nasabing 5 dapat? Di ba pwedeng 4? Di ba pwedeng 6? May mga ganong controversy related to that. Cultural issues, of course. There are specific experiences that are very specific to there are specific symptoms that are only exclusive to a particular culture, no? Um, and then I think ano naman, the DSM is very clear about its stance on culture. That actually that's another important ano pala, no? Merong ethno-racial parang discussion, and inintroduce nila yung importance nun. And you know, the DSM has been very culturally sensitive. Diba? The reason why we have culture-bound syndromes, we have cultural concepts of distress. Diba? Kasi nga, it acknowledges the fact that not all mental disorders are included in the DSM. So there's also gender bias, no? Sabi nung iba. Then meron ding daw mga non-empirical influences. Meron daw mga disorders na tinanggal not because of empirical reason. Okay? May mga ganun. And of course, yun din, another important criticism and another major ano no parang downside nito is yung limitations in terms of objectivity. Alright? So I think yun yung major na kailangan nating malaman no sa field ng psychopathology, because without some objective measures such as in a form of biomarkers, that won't allow us to that won't allow us to get to parang nandyan pa rin yung clinical judgment. And pag may clinical judgment, may subjectivity pa rin kahit paano. Diba? If we have biomarkers, we have, for example, medical procedure or other medical exams or laboratory exams that can be done. Pero ngayon, hindi pa natin talaga yun magawa. No? Kasi may mga biomarkers na hindi exclusive to specific diagnosis or disorder. Okay? So, with that, I think that's it. No, thank you very much for listening. I hope that was a learning experience to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Amion. Salamat po at napakaraming natutunan no, ng lahat ng mga nag-participate sa ating webinar na ito. At actually, napakadami ding mga questions. No, but because in the interest of time, we'll just be asking very few questions lang. No? Napakadami po. Siguro ito ay nasa 35 questions. So I guess 5 questions lang ang may entertain natin for this morning. Okay, so we're going to begin to ask questions. The first question is coming from Mr. Jerwin. Critics of DSM-5-TR or the DSM in general argue that the expansion of diagnostic criteria may increase the number of mentally ill, quote-unquote, individuals or pathologized normal behavior and lead to possibility that thousands, if not millions of new patients will be exposed to medication, which may cause more harm than good. So what is your comment about this po?
Yeah, I think, sir, that's a valid concern. No? And there's a tendency really because of diagnostic overexpansion. The tendency is for a lot of people to be pathologized, to be diagnosed with mental illness. And again, I think just like what I said earlier, we have to, number one, we still have to make sure na may ginagawa tayo to be able to eradicate, for example, stigma surrounding mental health issues or mental health related disorders. And I think yun yung major concern diba? So kasi ako, again, since Jerwin is asking about my comment on this, for me, if I were to be diagnosed, I don't care. As long as it will provide necessary treatment, diba? It will help me to become better. It will help me to develop some strategies or coping mechanisms because I will receive treatment kapag na-diagnose ako, diba? So that also, the diagnostic overexpansion for me does not only legitimizes the diagnostic categories but also legitimizes that there is a need for treatment. No, kailangan din ng treatment, 'di ba? So, kapag naka-receive ng treatment, and then we even help them. We even help them to thrive, even help them to become a person. So I think the major concern is how to remove the stigma, eliminate stigma, so that people will, kahit ma-diagnose ka, so what?